After he was crucified and raised from the dead, the followers of Jesus Christ went into all the world. To the Jews first, and then to the Gentiles, they preached that Jesus is the true Messiah, and that he suffered for the sins of men, according to the writings of the Holy Scripture.
To him give all the prophets witness, that through his name whosoever believeth in him shall receive remission of sins.
But Jesus himself had said to his disciples, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. The apostles also warned believers about seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, and of certain men who would creep into the church with deception and lies.
But there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privily shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction.
Through the Middle Ages, many of the reformers came to believe that these warnings pertained to the rise of the Roman Church. In the book of Revelation, they saw the picture of Rome's apostasy presented as an unfaithful woman sitting atop a seven-headed beast. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. But the Roman Church did not rise up overnight. It came about one step at a time through the early centuries. Once the papal system came into being, and it was clear that it represented an apostate system that combined pagan teachings and traditions with worldly politics, all under the mask of Christianity, you had Christians then that fell into two categories. There were those who followed after the teachings of the Pope and the Church of Rome, and then you had those who were known throughout history as Bible believers, who kept themselves separate from Rome and were determined to base their faith on the Scriptures alone, without any kind of man-made doctrines or sacred councils which they had in the Roman system. It was because they rejected the Pope's claims of authority that many Bible believers were persecuted in the early centuries. English author Adrian Hilton writes that the Roman pseudo-Christianity caused many faithful believers to flee into the mountains of Europe and Asia Minor to escape persecution and death. And there they continued away from the world's view as the true Church of Christ. As we said earlier, most of the reformers believed that the charges of heresy against these earlier groups were falsely created by Rome to justify her persecutions. Yet most Protestant historians believe that the Waldenses and the Albigenses were forerunners of the Reformation. 19th century historian William Jones wrote that to justify the Waldenses and Albigenses is indeed to defend the Reformation and Reformers, they having so long before us, with an exemplary courage, labored to preserve the Christian religion in its ancient purity, which the Church of Rome all this while has endeavored to abolish. To be more specific, it would be more accurate to say that the popes have endeavored to abolish biblical Christianity in favor of a religious system of their own making. And because of this, they have seen the Bible as their chief enemy. And this is the reason why they outlawed it from being read by the common people.
Throughout history, they gave different pronouncements saying that you can't give these holy things to the swine, and they use that scripture as completely bogus. Pearls before swine doesn't have anything to do with giving the life-giving scripture to the people, but the Roman Catholic Church just looked at the common man as pigs who could not possibly understand the scriptures.
Because of this, Martin Luther, and eventually the rest of the reformers, came to believe that the Pope was the fulfillment of biblical warnings concerning the greatest enemy of Christ.
If you make a study of the life of Luther, you'll find that there was a very slow transition from 1517, when he nailed the 90.
And they set about trying to prove all the flaws they could to the world. And at the same time, they officially declared through Vatican Council I that the Pope was infallible. So their message was clear: don't trust the Bible, trust the Pope. The Bible's a flawed book, the Pope is infallible. And so this brought everything full circle to the conflict that had been raging for hundreds of years throughout the Middle Ages. And that's ultimately what their meeting in Chieri, Italy was all about.
The information discussed by Jesuit leaders in Chieri was published in 1848 by a former Jesuit initiate named Jacopo Leone. His book was titled The Jesuit Conspiracy, The Secret Plan of the Order. In it, he claimed to have overheard the plans of Jesuit leaders and was compelled to write down the information and publish it as a warning to the rest of the world. Leone wrote specifically of how the Jesuits intended to take control of the Bible. Allegedly, they said, "Then the Bible, that serpent which, with head erect and eyes flashing fire, threatens us with its venom, shall be changed again into a rod as soon as we are able to seize it. O then, mysterious rod, we will not again suffer thee to escape from our hands. For you know too well that for 3 centuries past this cruel asp has left us no repose. You well know with what folds it entwines us, and with what fangs it gnaws us." According to Leone, one of the Jesuits openly admitted that the scriptures do not support the Roman Catholic faith. Speaking of the Bible, he said, "If I may tell you openly what I think of this book, it is not at all for us. It is against us. I do not wonder at the invincible obstinacy it engenders in all those who regard its verses as inspired. In the simplicity of youth, I fully expected, on opening the New Testament, to find there the authority of a superior chief in the church, the worship of the Virgin, the Mass, purgatory, relics. But in every page I found my expectations disappointed. At last, after having read at least 6 times over that little book, I was forced to acknowledge to myself that it actually sets forth a system of religion altogether different."
What this Jesuit priest acknowledged all the way back in the 19th century is the same thing that the reformers acknowledged. They noticed that the teachings of the Bible and the teachings of the Pope were dramatically different. The difference is that the reformers chose to follow the Bible, while the Jesuits chose to fight against it on behalf of the traditions and power of the Catholic Church.
The view of the Jesuits toward the Bible could be likened to that of the ancient Pharisees 2,000 years ago who opposed Christ. As Jesus said of them, "Full well ye reject the commandment of God, that ye may keep your own tradition." And again he said, "In vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men." At their meeting in Chieri in 1825, the Jesuits discussed the methods to be used in their ongoing counter-reformation and their plan for the subversion of the Bible. They said specifically that a few breaches made in Protestantism, whether these conversions proceed from genuine motives or whether they be determined by advantageous offers, which shall not be spared if the person be worth the trouble. We ought, by every possible means, to secure the aid of modern thinkers. If they can be induced to write at all in our favor, let us pay them well, either in money or in laudation.
The Jesuits, since the Middle Ages, have been known for seducing people outside the Catholic Church, even members of Protestant churches, and making deals with them to help the cause of Rome. And this was especially revealed in the 19th century during what was called the Oxford Movement in England. And it was in the wake of this movement that the Vatican really pushed to try and take control of the Bible. And that's why it's so important to understand what the Oxford Movement was all about.
The Oxford Movement was an attempt, effectively, to Romanize the Church of England and to get the Church of England away from the scriptures, from the King James Bible, and back to the ritualistic practices of Rome. Now, it was done in a very subtle manner.
In 1898, a man named Walter Walsh published a book titled The Secret History of the Oxford Movement. In it, he writes about the activities of the Jesuits in England. He recorded the testimony of a former Catholic priest who told him, "In England, there are a greater number of Jesuits than in Italy. There are Jesuits in all classes of society, in Parliament, among the English clergy, among the Protestant laity, even in the higher stations." Within less than 20 years after the Oxford Movement, another movement began in the world of biblical scholarship that would almost completely transform the understanding of the Bible. This transformation would be effected by men who were of the Protestant profession, but strangely worked in cooperation with Rome. The apostles also warned believers about seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, and of certain men who would creep into the church with deception and lies.
But there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be prophets witness, that through his name whosoever believeth in him shall receive remission of sins.
But Jesus himself had said to his disciples, "I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves."
False teachers among you, who privily shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction.
Through the Middle Ages, many of the reformers came to believe that these warnings pertained to the rise of the Roman Church. After he was crucified and raised from the dead, the followers of Jesus Christ went into all the world. To the Jews first, and then to the Gentiles, they preached that Jesus is the true Messiah, and that he suffered for the sins of men, according to the writings of the Holy Scripture.
To him give all the